Capricious, a new podcast looking at the events that are surrounding our crazy world and trying to understand them and integrate them into our daily lives. I am your host, Aaron Robinson, along with my other host, James Reed, and we are here to talk about what is happening. James, how are you doing today?
I'm doing pretty well, buddy. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. Before we get started, me and Jay are both attorneys in Texas. We like to keep up with the news and discuss things. So we decided we wanted to make a podcast to arbitrarily and capriciously, if you will, examine the things that are happening in the world. And so, Jay, let's kick it off. What do you want to talk about first?
Well, something that really interests me is the situation in Syria. And you and we'd earlier talked a little bit about the corruption allegations against Benjamin Netanyahu, which is something else I wanted to also get into. But really, I just wanted to sort of revisit the situation in Syria, kind of talk about the main actors in there and sort of, what's going on and what's going to be happening in the future. What do you got to talk about today?
Well, I definitely want to go into the memos. We have the House Intelligence Committee releasing memos discussing the underlying warrants issued for the FBI investigation into, I think it's Carter Page, and ultimately the Trump campaign and its ties to the Russia collusion accusations. So there's been a lot of political fighting on Capitol Hill over the last few months about this investigation. The Republicans have been trying to undermine the Mueller investigation, and the Democrats have been trying to fight off that attack. And so today, or yesterday, Saturday, I believe it was the 24th?
Today we're recording this morning on February the 25th, a nice, lovely Sunday morning in the North Texas.
Yeah, 2018. On the 24th, the Democrats released their memo to counter the Nunes memo that was released a few weeks ago by the Republicans, accusing some of the FBI of some wrongdoing. So I think that's something that's really important. It's very relevant to what's happening here in U.S. politics today. So that's one thing I would like to go into.
Okay.
Let's see here. Let's start with Syria, and just for an overcap, if we remember, in 2011 there was the Arab uprisings, and Egypt, Tunisia, all these different countries. There was these kind of like quasi-revolutions where the people were rising up against the government that was being oppressive in some way. I think Tunisia got a new government, Egypt got a new government. And along with that, Syria attempted to ride that wave of revolution and populism and usurp Assad, who had been president since his dad, I guess, left power. So we kind of have a presidential dynasty. And so the Syrian, quote unquote, civil war has been raging since 2011. And so looking at this event, we have to remember this is not something that just happened last month or last year, but this is now, dragging on for half a decade.
Exactly. It's troubling. I remember reading articles back when I was still in school back in 2012, 2013 about the forgotten destruction of Syria and how terrible it was at that point. And that was 5 years ago, and it's really only gotten worse. But I'm glad that you kind of started from the beginning, because I think context is important here. Because this is a horrible oversimplification of the situation, but sort of in general, Syria is ruled by Assad. Assad is he's a Shia, and as a result, the ruling elite class prior to the civil war were also Shias, while the majority of the country were in fact Sunnis. So there was definitely oppression of the Sunni majority. They were not allowed to practice as they saw fit. They were not allowed to, they weren't allowed the freedom that we take for granted sometimes. So with the Arab Spring, as you were describing, the civil war started out as a various different kind of medley of rebel groups looking to overthrow Assad. Out of that grew what we sort of refer to as the so-called moderate Syrian rebels. These are rebels that are looking to overthrow Assad and hopefully replace him with a democratic government.
These are the ones that are backed by the United States, right? These are the ones the U.S. is like, hey, these are good guys, right?
Right. And we're going to get into that a little bit later, but there's what kind of most of what I wanted to talk about is who's backed by who. And so at the beginning, we had the moderate rebels. We also had the Islamist rebels. These were groups like ISIS. And in 2015, at that point, it was looking like the rebels were in fact going to overthrow Assad. Being that the moderate rebels or the Islamist rebels in combination, Assad was losing. And at this point, I believe it was September 2015, Russia intervenes on behalf of Assad. And with the help of particularly Russian air power, they've been able to turn the tide of the war on both fronts, both against the Islamist rebels and against the moderate rebels.
So Assad has essentially regained some foothold and power in the country.
Correct.
And because Russia has backed them, they were able to essentially beat back both the Islamists and the moderate rebels. Now, at the same time, ISIS is getting bombed in Iraq by the United States. So ISIS is fighting a two-front war there too. They're getting hit by Russia and by the U.S. So they're in a pretty intense predicament as well.
Right, exactly. Now, as we sit here in 2018, ISIS, for the most part, and the majority of those Islamist rebels, they have been defeated. They are completely in retreat. They don't occupy the same territory. They don't occupy the same population that they used to by any sort of standard. And that's a good thing. I don't mean to say that that's a bad thing at all. But so the situation that we have here now is we have Assad, who's being propped up by both Russian air power and also by Iranian involvement, because the Iranians are arming Shia militias, which are supporting Assad. And then also they're using Syria as a conduit to funnel arms to Hezbollah in Lebanon. So we have that interconnected web there. Now, Turkey is a complete wild card here.
Yeah, Turkey has historically been a NATO ally and usually on the same side of the United States. But since the United States sees the Kurds as an oppressed people and the Turks do not, they see them as a insurrection kind of rebel outgrouping. We're on opposite sides here. And so there's been a lot of tension between the United States and Turkey due to this conflict.
Exactly. And I'm glad that you brought up the Kurds, because this brings in an additional fault line to this conflict. Where earlier we were talking a little bit about the Shia Sunni split. Now we have this divide along ethnic lines, where we have the Arabs, who both the Arabs and the Kurds share countries like Syria and Iraq, while Turkey is shared by the Turks and the Kurds. And in all of those situations, the Kurds are the minority. And they're probably the most famous example of a nation without a state. And so we have
I mean, other than the Jews for a long time, but they kind of have a state now.
Sure. Yeah, of course. So we've got the situation where we have Turkey treating the Kurdish militias as terrorists, where in fact in Syria, the Syrian Democratic Forces, the most successful moderate rebel group, is primarily made up of Kurds. And so the Syrian Democratic Forces, those are the ones that are being backed by the United States. And at this point, they're actually being attacked by Turkey. And within the last couple of weeks, they actually struck a deal with the Assad regime, where the Syrian government forces have come to the aid of the moderate rebels in order to fight the Turks. I'm sorry. I probably shouldn't say to fight the Turks. That's inflammatory to fight the forces from Turkey.
They're fighting, yeah. I guess they haven't been called Turks since like the 1800s or something.
Right, you know, Turks. That's an ethnic. That's an ethnicity, and we're talking about the nations here. But that just also goes to demonstrate how complicated this situation is. So we have a situation where where we have a NATO ally potentially fighting against American forces. We also have something that's come out recently within about the last month is the sheer scale of Russian mercenaries who have gone to Syria. These are not officially Russian government forces, but they're working for a private security contractor, which some evidence suggests that the budget for the security contractor is coming from the Russian Defense Ministry anyway. But anyway.
So essentially the money is being funneled to Syria to pay for Russian mercenaries to fight on the ground. So Russia can claim that they are only keeping an air involvement as a nation, but they're using this kind of mercenary loophole to get troops on the ground.
Exactly. Back home, they want to portray that this is just an air war. We're not going to lose any of our boys on the ground. When, in fact, within the last couple of weeks, American airstrikes killed something like they're estimating dozens of these independent Russian mercenaries. But the Russian government, they're not going to raise a stink about it because the point of them being mercenaries is so that they don't have to.
Exactly, they're soldiers of fortune. So Russia doesn't have any culpability. That's a clever game that Putin's playing here. I mean, really, this all comes down to a giant proxy war. We have these giant nations that are essentially intervening and playing a part in trying to choose who will rule Syria. Now, you brought up something that I kind of want to sidebar into for a second about Iran, and its conflict with Israel. You know, Israel has been blowing up Iranian drones, and I think even shut down a plane or something in recent days, and has really increased the tensions. Now, I actually was in Israel in 2017 in the spring, and I saw Syria. Like we drove along the Golan Heights, and you could see into Syria. I mean, that's how close Israel is to this. And you know, the fact that Lebanon, which is I think to the north of Israel, also is not a friendly ally, they're smuggling weapons through Syria into Lebanon. That's causing increased tensions. Now, we also have at the same time Netanyahu, who has been kind of like the stalwart individual running Israel for the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, is getting potentially indicted, and already some of the people who he has been accused of having fraudulent relations with or taking bribes or something are turning and willing to testify. So we're going to see a huge shakeup in Israeli politics while we have all this increased tension going on in the region.
Yeah, the story about Netanyahu I found very interesting. Do you happen to know the details about what he's accused of receiving?
I don't know. Because I don't know the specifics, but I do know that he was accused of essentially taking gifts in exchange for allowing contracts to go to people who gave him gifts. So.
But I think the gifts are a little bit hilarious to me because what he's accused of receiving it's champagne, cigars, and I think like designer jewelry.
Yeah, that's the one thing. The lady who sat next to me on the flight back from Tel Aviv told me that his wife got jewelry from some of the contractors. And
the total of the improper benefits received, the estimate that I read this morning, it was only something like $282,000.
I mean, only $282,000, but still the fact that there's an ability to influence the guy who's running the government in Israel, essentially, and who's the head of the party that's in charge. And he's not voted on by the people. You know, it's a parliament more style where the party selects the prime minister, and you know, you vote on your members in the Knesset, which is what they call their parliament. And so this guy who's essentially been there in an unelected position is taking bribes. And even if it is 280,000, that's something that I think people are concerned with overall, especially, you know, I don't know. I can't speak. I'm not Israeli, but I mean, over here, if somebody's taking bribes and they're giving contracts, I have an issue with that.
No, absolutely. I don't mean to defend the guy in any way. I honestly think he's a little bit too right wing for me. But I don't mean to downplay his crimes, because I'm sure if you can prove that he's taken $282,000, there's probably several million that he's taken that you can't prove.
That's also a true statement. You don't know. That's just what we know about. We don't
Yeah.
know what happened, ever so long ago. But I just think that it's an interesting, question, or not question, but an interesting thing to think about, how this is going to kind of upheave Israeli politics in the middle of a very tense situation, and a lot of times whenever there's that kind of tension, that's used to try and overlook, indiscretion, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. And a very unexpected twist of the last couple of years has actually been the improving relations that we've seen between Israel and, of all people, Saudi Arabia.
That has been a really interesting change, and maybe it's because of Saudi Arabia has been more modernizing in the past decade, but and Israel's a very modernized Eastern country, if you will.
Sure, but it's really that you're talking about proxy wars, and I think we've got kind of a proxy war between the United States and Russia going on that nobody really wants to admit yet. But the one that's been burning brighter has been Saudi Arabia and Iran, where Saudi Arabia and Israel are aligning against encroaching Iranian influence.
No, that's a good observation. I mean, Saudi Arabia has hated Iran for a long time, and especially with the consolidation of power that happened recently in Saudi Arabia, where the prince essentially arrested a bunch of the royal family and ensured that he was going to be in control of everything. That move alone kind of perked my ears up a little bit, and especially with Saudi Arabia getting more aggressive towards Iran. I mean, it's a question on who's going to control the territory or influence in the region, and Russia really doesn't want the United States to have any more influence in the region than we already have, especially with two strong allies like Syria and Iran for them in the region.
Oh, absolutely. And a feeling that I've gotten from specifically Russia's intervention in Syria is that it seems to echo a lot of the German intervention into the Spanish Civil War, where it's almost like they are using this as an opportunity to fine-tune their weapons for the next confrontation on an enemy that really can't strike back. So it's interesting to see what's going to happen next. This is a powder keg that at any moment could really go off. You mentioned earlier the development in the last few days or weeks where the Israeli the jet was shot down.
Yeah.
What happened there was a drone of Iranian origin that was doing reconnaissance and came into Israeli territory. So the Israelis shot it down. So there was then retaliatory strikes from Israel into Syria, where they went after the base where the drone came from, as well as other points of infrastructure that they suspect originally came from Iran. That then, what's the words? Then the Syrians and I'm sorry, I'm losing my train of thought. But the against the Israeli airstrikes, the Syrians they decided responded. The Israeli jet was shot down, but luckily, really, I think for everybody, is that the Israeli jets landed in Israel and the pilot was able to eject safely and he's fine. So if either one of those things hadn't happened, if the pilot had to eject over Syrian territory, and then the Israelis would have had to go do a search and rescue operation on the ground, it
could have triggered to an all-out international war. We could have had the Syrian Civil War break out into a Middle Eastern confrontation with Israel, and at that point, this is where this interesting relationship with Saudi Arabia comes in. If Iran and Israel are having a ground war in Syria, there's a good chance that Saudi Arabia jumps in, and there's a good chance that honestly, like Jordan jumps in, because Jordan has a lot of
absolutely.
interest in the area, and Jordan has benefited a lot from Israel over the last couple of decades. When we were driving through down the Jordan River, you could look over into Jordan and see all these biodome type outcroppings, and they were of Israeli design. They went over and gave them this technology to allow them to grow more and better food in higher, quantities and quality. And so that's, and also the fact that Israel is a breadbasket for the area. It exports so much more like food than it imports. So I mean, this is a very delicate situation that's going down over here.
Absolutely. And to kind of tie it back into, why should this matter to us here on the other side of the ocean? Well, earlier we were talking about Turkey. Well, Turkey's a member of NATO. And part of our commitment to NATO is that if Turkey is drawn into some sort of war there and Turkey is attacked, then the United States as a NATO ally is obligated to come to her aid.
Now, is that only in regards to an actual nation-on-nation attack? Not like they can't say, hey, the Kurdish rebels in Syria attacked us. That's not sufficient. It has to be like Iran has attacked Turkey, or Israel has attacked Turkey, or something like that, correct?
That's a good question, and I'm really not sure, because I don't even know if this clause of the NATO convention has ever even been triggered. So we're really in uncharted territory, and with the current president and his equivocal commitments to NATO, that rather than having us drawn into a war, it's possible it could just be the end of NATO, which I really don't know which one is worse.
And that would definitely go along with Russia's entire objective of the last 30 years to get rid of NATO. And isn't it just a beautiful transition over into the Russian investigation?
Let's bring it back to domestic politics.
There we go. And with that, we will talk about how Russia's meddling in our election has tainted this presidency and has caused constant upheaval and scandal and ridiculously stupid statements from lots of people. And I think that the one thing I want to talk about first is I want to go into this Nunez memo. So there's this Republican congressman from California, and his name is it's something Nunez. I can't remember. Devin Nunez. He looks like a Devin. Devin Nunez really has this memo drafted, and it essentially claims that the FBI, when getting wiretap warrants from the FISA court, relied erroneously or improperly on the Steele dossier. Now, the Steele dossier is the collection of information that was gathered by a British spy, and it was funded primarily by the DNC and Hillary Clinton. Apparently, it initially started by a Republican donor wanting to try and get some dirt on Trump, and then it kind of snowballed into a whole DNC backing it. Now, the reason why this is controversial is
hold on one second. Kenny, I apologize, but I have really not followed the story as much as I should have. So maybe you can clarify something for me.
Go ahead.
You mentioned getting the warrant from the FISA court. Can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I'm not really clear about what all that meant.
Okay, so no, absolutely. So the FISA court is a clandestine spy court. After we passed the Patriot Act in 2001, we had to have a mechanism for allowing the federal government to essentially spy on people under the Patriot Act, whether they be international or domestically. And so we don't want the people that we're looking into knowing that we're looking into them. So instead of having this in a public federal Article 3 federal court, they created the FISA court. And the FISA court essentially is a secret tribunal where the FBI brings information to the tribunal. They look at the information, they determine whether or not they're going to grant a warrant for wiretapping purposes. Now, they were investigating an individual named Carter Page. The FBI was investigating this guy. And Carter Page was bragging about his connections to Russia and was meeting with a known spy maker from Russia and a lot of other things. Now, this was happening in 2015, 16. and it's before the election really is done. So Carter Page is already being investigated. Then Carter Page gets brought into the Trump campaign. Okay, so because of that, this investigation into Carter Page starts to get expanded. Now they use the Trump dossier to prove certain aspects of meetings and testimony by Carter Page. Now that's why the Democrat memo is so important. Nunes was trying to use this memo to undermine the investigation into collusion with Russia and the Trump campaign. He was trying to say that the FBI's investigation was tainted by politics, that this was a witch hunt. And that's why it was so important that they point out that the FBI warrant relied on the Steele dossier, which was paid for by the Democrats. So this is an attempt to undermine the Mueller investigation. Now, really, this warrant that this memo is about is only about Carter Page. Okay, and this investigation started before the Steele dossier was even created. So that's why it's a ridiculous political stunt by Representative Nunes and by the Republican Party, because they had this memo. They knew, the FBI even weighed in and said that is an incomplete, memo, that is incomplete information. It's misleading. It uses omissions to try and make things more salacious, and the president released it, and he tried to use that as ammunition, fodder to try and undermine the Mueller investigation. So the Democrats, they wrote their own memo and they wanted to release it, and Trump tried to block it, and the Republicans tried to block it. It was just released this Saturday. And so I was taking a look at it, and one of the things that it pointed out is that, like we just said, the Carter Page had been under investigation for a long time before all the stuff with the Trump and Russia collusion accusations came about. That this guy already was meeting with Russians before he got involved with Trump. So the fact that they use the dossier to, essentially corroborate information about what Carter Page said has nothing to do with Democrats or who paid for it. So this was just a political fight. Now, this is what it seems like is happening, is that there's an old adage that us lawyers like to say, that if the law's on your side, hammer the law. If the facts are on your side, hammer the facts. And if neither are on your side, bang the table and hammer the other side. It kind of feels like that's what's going on. Neither the law nor the facts are on the side of the Republicans that are resisting this investigation. So they have to come out and swing as hard as they can at the Democrats. So the tension in the country due to these type of events constantly happening is really, really in an interesting place. I mean, would you not agree?
Oh, absolutely.
Like, I find that, when you talk to people, they're either so far to the left or so far to the right. If you mention Trump, their response is either anger or
immediate defense.
Immediate defense. Exactly. No, you nailed it. And so we are living in a very, very polarized, domestic society right now. And the worst thing is that the president has no interest in changing that polarity. It's almost like he thrives off that polarity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a political cartoon I saw after the State of the Union this year where it's Trump calling for unity while he's taking a chainsaw to the body of the American people. Because that's what that speech was, where he was asking, he was saying that he was going to make America great again for all Americans. That was his big takeaway from it, while subtly making digs at the divisive issues that make people scream at each other, and he's just thriving off of it. And
well, I mean, he's very much, in my opinion, a troll, an internet troll.
Absolutely.
I mean, he feeds off that energy that gets people riled up, and it's really interesting to watch him in front of a live audience at a rally versus watching him have to give a speech that he has to read off of a teleprompter. Because when he's in front of that live audience, he's able to feed off of their energy, their emotion, their reaction, and that's when he goes off script and starts just saying crazy stuff. And whenever he has the speech, it's very boring. It's still, of course, not something that I agree with, but he doesn't have those wild moments of ridiculousness, I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, absolutely. It's almost like he's a performer,
Yes,
first
he's
and
a
foremost,
performer.
but he's not a good one.
No, that's true. He is a performer. He's been a performer. He's a salesman. He has to sell himself. And so whenever he has someone who's reacting, it's easier for him to feed into that. When he has no reaction, what does he feed off of? I mean, I think my favorite meme from after the State of the Union was the video of the president clapping for himself.
Yes.
Because like the Democrats weren't clapping. I guess he had to clap.
So let me pose you a question then.
Sure, go ahead.
So he's a troll. Is his trolling intentional? Does he have does he have an agenda through which he's going to push with all this mayhem, or do you think he's just an old man pandering to other old men?
I do think that. I honestly think two things. One, I think that he thought that becoming president would be able to, I guess, immortalize his brand, his name forever in a good way. And it clearly has done the opposite of that. And so, honestly, I would be surprised if there wasn't talk of someone else running for president after him or for the Republican Party. If he just says, you know what, I'm just not going to run. But I do think that he wanted to, one, take power, and two, he wanted to get taxes better for his family and himself and his other rich friends. I think that's why the tax thing was pushed through so hard, so fast, is that's probably something he does care about, and honestly, that comes back to, different values in our society and what's important to people. I understand people don't like to pay taxes, but I like roads and highways. And if anyone has driven in Dallas before, they have greatly improved by expanding our interstate highways, which are federal roads, which are 80% funded by the federal government. So those taxes actually are really, really beneficial to our society. So
both of us are publicly educated.
Yes, we are. Well, until law school, then we went to private school. But
they don't need to know that.
They don't need to know that. Just ignore that last comment. So we believe in paying for things that are beneficial to society because we all have to live together. Whenever I think there's a great quote by the guy who wrote Slaughterhouse-Five. I can't remember his name. I'm not sure that's his name.
No, that's Catch-22. That's Kurt Vonnegut.
Kurt Vonnegut says, there's a crazy moment when you look up and you realize that all your classmates from high school are running the world, and it's quite terrifying. And we're getting to that age where we're going to start seeing people we know run for office and, basically enter into running the country. So it's not a crazy thing. I mean, my dad went to law school with one of the city council members, Clay Jenkins, here in Dallas, and they were law school classmates. So that's something that we have to deal with. And so having a good public education benefits all of us, and this is kind of something I've personally been thinking about a lot lately, is I feel like our American individuality has become a hindrance as a quality. We don't think about the greater, importance of society. And, I'm all for being an individual and being yourself and all that stuff. I'm not saying, copycat everybody and everybody has to wear uniforms, but I'm just saying that when there's a certain point whenever you're only focusing on yourself, it's that super libertarian mindset, I don't care what anybody else does as long as nobody else screws with me. But you need other people. You need the people who bake the bread and who grow the grains and, every aspect of production. Society is interwoven at this point. You got 7 billion people on the planet. It's not something that you can just walk away from. So I feel that we as Americans, we've neglected investing in infrastructure that benefits society as a whole. And that comes from our super capitalistic, individualistic mentality.
Oh, absolutely. I'd agree with all of that completely. It feels like, well, I shouldn't say it feels like. I know this to be true, is that the political spectrum has realigned, where we used to have left and right, and now we have open and closed.
Yeah, that's true.
And there's a I'm sure you see it out on social media a lot. People repeat this phrase where they say, it's usually on the left, where they say, if I have to explain to you that you should care about other people, well, then like, if I have to explain that to you, then you're too far gone.
Yeah, there's no hope anymore.
And I think that there's some truth in that, but the weakness in it is that if you say that to someone who disagrees with you, they're just going to turn you off. They're not going to listen to you anymore, because at that point you're just shouting them down.
It's the I can't remember the name of the theory, but it's the theory that online, once you get to the point where you're calling each other Nazis, that no one's listening anymore. Yes. So there's no point in continuing to talk until the actual Nazis showed up on the scene again, and we had to change that equation.
Right. Like, you see, like, people call Trump a fascist, and I want to say that's you're overusing that word. That word has a specific meaning, and to call everyone a fascist means that it loses its meaning.
This is true, but what happens whenever something lines up 12 out of 14 with the 14 points of fascism? At what point do I get to say, hey, you're a fascist? Now, if you call yourself a Nazi, like the alt-right people,
automatically you're a Nazi.
You're a Nazi. You're a fascist. But like when someone is like toting the line, like when someone is like, hard right, and they're not quite saying, hey, I'm a Nazi and I hate, other ethnicities, but they hit every aspect of what it means to be a fascist. How do you not say you objectively are a fascist?
That's true.
It's like, I've got a PowerPoint I can pull up that has the 14 points of fascism, and I analyzed it and laid it over the Trump presidency in 2017, and he had 12 of 14 covered. So, I feel at some point there has to be an ability to say, you are a fascist. Good day. It's like Maury, the test results are in, you are a fascist.
Oh, wow. Well, to bring it back to the Russia investigation, I also wanted to pick your thoughts about Trump's response to the investigation and sort of what that means, in that his response to it has been all framed in his personal self, where the evidence shows that Russia meddled in the election, and his response is not, this is a grave threat to our national security. His response was,
well, I'm still president.
This is bunk. This is a witch hunt against me. I did not collude with them. And even at this point, we have not seen evidence of collusion, but the evidence of the meddling is clear.
We have clear, concise, non-arbitrary or capricious evidence that Russia has in fact meddled in our domestic affairs. Now, this is
a moment and just just run down real quick. What do we know that they actually did? Because it's pretty bad.
Well, here, so I haven't read everything that they've done, but I do know that we recently indicted, or at least Mueller indicted, 13 Russian individuals and 3 Russian companies. And one of those companies was the Internet Research Agency, and it essentially was pumping up fake news constantly. It was a troll farm, constantly pumping fake news into the American domestic Twitter sphere, Facebook, social media, YouTube, anything they could get it into. And it was always designed to cause this polarity that we're experiencing right now. Like, it is intentionally designed to undermine our domestic system. I think it's also, just kind of sidebar, an attack on our media and our news and our information gathering, because when have you ever seen a time where the news has been under attack, just journalism in general, in this country? I can't remember a time
when journalists were so attacked here.
Yeah, so I think that stems directly from these Russian attacks on our institutions as a whole. So what do you know about the meddling? What have you found?
Well, they found evidence, mostly through social media, that what they would do is these troll farms would set up fake profiles, Facebook accounts, Twitter accounts. Then they would use those accounts not to just to send out the misinformation, but they actually organized things like Trump rallies. And
I saw that. I saw that they would create like fake events to try and I think they set up an event in Dallas, and it was like two protests on the same day, a counter protest and a regular protest, both were set up by the same Russian trolls.
Exactly. And in many cases, it wasn't even fake events. There were real rallies organized by the Russians and in conjunction with the Trump campaign that organized these events. Now, I don't mean to say that the Trump campaign knew that they were Russians. What the evidence shows is that the people in the Trump campaign who did work with the troll farms, they were duped. They were hoodwinked into thinking they were dealing with honest American Trump supporters.
Yeah, but I've seen video of people who were sharing this stuff and they're being like confronted with the fact that they were sharing fake news and it was created by Russia, and they say, well, I don't really think that matters. I mean, that's a problem. Right.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Immediate defensive-ness of it doesn't matter what comes out now. It doesn't matter. I am still sticking with this because I can't even explain it.
It's like the people who still say that there were WMDs in Iraq and that's why we went in. I mean, come on, man. It's been a decade. It's been over a decade. That's not why we went in.
Yeah. So and Trump's response to all of this, where it's all about him. I'll just ask you point blank. Do you think that he colluded with Russia?
I like the super hardcore liberal core inside me definitely wants to believe that that's the case, but I feel like it's a combination of dumb luck and opportunity. I think the Russians saw Trump as someone they could easily abuse and use. I mean, he idolizes Putin for some crazy reason. That would probably be the biggest point towards believing that it was collusion. The fact that he's like, the FBI is lying, journalists are lying, everyone who says that I'm colluding is lying. Putin's a good guy, and Putin's doing proxy wars and all this crazy stuff internationally, and is trying to influence European election, American elections, British elections, the Brexit. He's a bad dude. He's a despot, and that is probably the biggest thing that keeps me leaning towards, I think he colluded, but honestly, I feel like it probably was the Russians just saying, this guy's someone that we can easily manipulate. And he's already a troll, and our tactic is to troll the American people. So it just kind of fits our model. So maybe that's it. I know that Putin hated Hillary because Hillary hardlined him during her time at the state office. So I think a big part of that was anyone but Hillary. And Hillary was the top dog for the left for the majority of the campaign. And we know about we haven't talked about it, but a lot of the controversy with Bernie and the DNC and all that stuff, but we can get into that on another day.
Absolutely. It's I kind of feel like you were. It's almost like I want the evidence to come out, the evidence of the collusion to come out, but just in my own personal opinion, I don't know if he's smart enough to collude with the Russians. I think he just that's what I
think. And I was gonna say, whenever I started seeing some of the things in that dossier, I was like, this is like the worst collusion conspiracy ever. This is like conspiring with idiots. Like, you guys, it's like the lawyer who created the Delaware corporation to pay off the prostitute for the president, and he puts his name on the filing document. I mean,
yes.
What kind of idiots is the president surrounding himself with? I fear that cabinet is just a box of black crayons, because it is not bright in that house. It is not the White House right now.
No, it's crazy. I'm speechless. Well,
I'll transition us to another domestic topic that I'd like to talk about for the last segment here.
Sure.
I would like to talk about, number one, the Second Amendment, the NRA, and the perpetualness of school shootings and violence in the United States. And as a individual who grew up in the South, who grew up in Texas, who grew up around guns, shooting guns, even though my family was fairly liberal, we always had guns. We went hunting, we went shooting for fun. Guns were a part of our life, and we were taught safety. We were taught to respect and protect the weapons. Don't let them be out in a place where they can be used without, supervision. So that was always a big important part of my life. Now, I obviously have no need for a semi-automatic rifle or a assault weapon. I have one. I am one of these people that would be affected by an assault weapon ban. And honestly, I have no need for it. I took it hunting one time. I couldn't kill a deer with it. I had to go get a deer rifle because the gun just doesn't have the stopping power, but it does have the power to stop a human. And that's the problem here is we have a society that truly doesn't understand the Second Amendment, number one, and they don't understand that the Second Amendment is not just the words in the Constitution. It is all the constitutional law that hangs out there in those cases that the Supreme Court decides. And so I bring this up all the time whenever I'm talking to people about guns is our Constitution, as it stands right now in the case law, only guarantees you a right to a handgun in your home for self-defense. Everything beyond that right now is a privilege. So your ability to own an assault weapon, your ability to carry openly or in a concealed fashion is a privilege that the state grants you. That is not a right. So, you have to realize those things. That's where we're starting from. Whereas the NRA has convinced everyone that, hey, you have a right to all guns, any guns, whatever guns you can get your hands on, because the Second Amendment says that you have a right to arms, to bear arms. And this is really an issue, once again, with our lack of funding of education. We don't teach people the right things about our government when we're teaching people about government. We teach them there are three branches, and I guarantee you most Americans, that's about as far as they get, Mm-hmm. But understanding how the Constitution works, how federalism works, how, for 100 years, our Bill of Rights didn't even apply to the states. I didn't learn that till I went to law school.
Absolutely. There's a complete misunderstanding of how the courts play into our democracy.
Exactly. They have no idea. Like this whole situation, this is actually kind of a nice little segue here, but the whole situation with Pennsylvania and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court saying under our state constitution, these maps that you've created violate our state constitution. There's nothing the Supremes can say about that. Mm-hmm. This is a state constitution issue. They're appealing to the Supreme Court saying, hey, the state Supreme Court is not being fair. A bunch of Democrats are trying to undo our gerrymandering. I don't think the Supremes have the authority to weigh in on that issue. Mm-hmm. It's an interpretation of the state constitution. So without understanding federalism, you don't understand why the 10th Amendment's important. We don't understand why the 9th Amendment's important. I mean, most people can't, once you get past like one or two amendments, they don't even know what they say. Mm-hmm. They don't know their rights. And so this is a fundamental problem with our society. I think we need to address it. And it has stemmed this extremist gun culture that has grown in the post 9/11 world. I really feel that 9/11 was an event in American society that caused our society to pull hard towards extreme situations. Like we seem to be going from one extreme to the next. It doesn't ever seem like there's ever a sense of, moderation in our society anymore. So that's kind of the starting point here. We recently had the shooting at Parkland. It's caused, once again, gun control, violence to be in the news again. And the NRA has been taking a serious hit this time. I mean, there are companies just bailing on their partnerships with the NRA. I mean, like Delta, United, they have left. Hertz, Budget, Avis, they've left. MetLife, Symantec, some big companies are just completely cutting ties with the NRA. I mean, that definitely weakens their, reach, but they still have a lot of money. Until the politicians stop taking money from these giant industry lobby groups, we're going to have special interests running our government. Honestly, we really need to change the Constitution and eliminate Citizens United. That's something I think we have to do as a society.
Yeah, I had a friend say to me recently that after looking at our country during this debate, she said, democracy isn't that great of a thing. And my response to that was, Don't lose hope in democracy. I think the problems that we're seeing now are flaws in the way that we Americans have constructed ours.
I agree.
Don't blame the rule of the people.
Well, and see, here's the thing. A lot of the stuff that we're talking about are these legal fictions that we created to run a system.
Mhm.
You know, this was set up 200, 300 years ago. It's something that we have to remember and realize. Now, I think these are very wise rules that we've set up for our government to operate by, and I'm glad that we have these protections. But at the same time, you know, it really is hard for me to look at Australia or Britain or any other country that banned guns for the public. And they're like, we don't have school shootings. We don't have, you know, that kind of stuff. Now, they still have terrorists. And they still have bombings. So that doesn't eliminate violence. But, you know, these weapons can do a lot of damage really fast to a lot of people. I mean, look at Vegas. Look at the shooting at Vegas. That guy had how many guns? 100 and something different guns? Shot thousands of rounds of ammunition into a crowd of people at a concert.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
in a matter of minutes.
In a matter of minutes. I mean, these are weapons of war. Weapons of war. You know, the reason why we don't want the military operating within the nation is because the military fights the enemies of the state. And when the military is operating in the country, we're the enemies of the state. Mm-hmm. That's why we don't want our police acting like military. You know, they're supposed to protect and serve us. They're not supposed to, you know, militarily police us. So,
well, I think something that you just said, I think might illustrate a divide in our society, in that I think that there are plenty of people in this country who would disagree with you on that last point and say, I do want a militarized police force because we need order.
But see, that's the thing. It's our society was founded on two principles: order and liberty. If you have too much order, we start looking like North Korea. If you have too much liberty, we start looking like Somalia. You know, we have to have a balance. The society, the Constitution, the founding fathers, they understood that compromise and balance was something that was important. You know, what do we refer to the three branches of government as? A balance of power. Mm-hmm. You know. And so these people who want to give up liberty for security, even the liberals who are like, hey, you know, we need to make sure that people don't have any guns. Well, hold on. I think that gun ownership and that right is important, but we have the authority to regulate this stuff. Guns travel in interstate commerce. The most powerful clause in the Constitution is the Interstate Commerce Clause. Tag that with the necessary and proper, and we have the authority to regulate. And the Supreme Court ruled a long time ago, reasonable restrictions on gun ownership do not violate the Constitution.
Absolutely.
These are not absolute rights. These are qualified rights. And again, this is something I didn't learn was a thing until I was in law school. But it's something that each American should understand, you know? I feel like that's the problem the internet has. The internet thinks that free speech has no limit. I can say whatever, whenever, to whoever, and there's no repercussions. That's not what free speech means. There has always been a limitation in free speech. There has always been the ability for the government to regulate the time, manner, place. You know, you don't get to shout fire in a crowded theater. You don't get to say fighting words. You don't get to say things that'll incite a riot. There have always been limitations to free speech, you know, but free speech has also protected the minority from the majority whenever they wanted to silence them. So it's a very important right, but these are complex issues. We have to remember, and we have to kind of respect the foundation that these things were built on.
Absolutely. And I just want to take 1 second and say that what we're doing here right now is a great illustration of what does and continues to make our country great. That you and I can get together, speak our minds, criticize the regime, criticize the government, post it on the internet for whoever else to hear. And you know what's going to happen? At least for now,
we don't have to worry about someone showing up at our house and you know, handcuffing us and throwing a bag over our heads and throwing us in a van and driving us down to the river.
Right.
You know,
Worst case scenario, no one ever listens to this.
The worst case scenario, 12 people listen to this and no one ever like considers it something important. But to those 12 people who do listen, and I'm speaking in faith here, I hope you're enjoying this. Now, to kind of tie it back in, I kind of went off on a constitutional tangent here.
Bring it back.
Bringing it back. We are seeing something that I think is finally necessarily happening, because for the first time, after every shooting, the Democrats got upset, the Republicans got upset at the Democrats getting upset. We yelled and we shouted, and then nothing happened. Obama tried to do something in 2012 after the Sandy Hook shooting, but they'd already lost the House. The Republicans blocked any type of legislation from going through. And we've had, innumerable shootings since then. And the one thing that's different about this one is that the kids got involved.
Yes.
The kids who are the ones who have to live through this. Someone pointed out that Columbine was 18 years ago. These kids have never known a world where there were not school shootings. Mm-hmm. Okay? And here they've stepped up and they've taken it to the political spectrum. They've taken it to the legislatures. They are raising money. They're, organizing walkouts. They're using their First Amendment rights. Even though they can't vote, they're doing something to try and change the culture. And to me, that is why the NRA is scared. That is why the Republicans are scared, is because when people who have nothing to lose, these kids are not going for election. They're not, trying to I guess get somebody to like them or something. They're doing this because this is their life at stake. This is their daily life, and they're required to be there by their lives. They have nothing to lose but their lives, and that's the thing that's at risk right now. Mm-hmm. They experienced it. They saw evil, and they had to face it. These people in Washington, they're not having to see it. It's that ivory tower mentality, mm-hmm. and as long as the money keeps flowing, we got a problem in this country. So I hope that these awesome students who have decided to say, hey, the adults aren't doing anything, let's step in and do something. Mm-hmm. I applaud them, and I hope that they are successful in shifting the conversation and the culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I was reading this morning that the opinion polls and such suggest that the opinions on gun control of people who are 18 to 34 are about the same as the opinions on gun control of people from 34 to 70. Mm. That people kind of our age feel the same way as the people who are making the decisions now. But an important thing to point out there is that those polls are only based on people over 18, people who can vote. These kids you're talking about, they can't. And as you just said, it's been 18 going on 19 years since Columbine. And there is a generational fault line with this younger generation. And I hope we see change. I hope this is a catalyst that can actually make things happen, but we'll see.
Well, and kind of a last point, I think we are seeing this with this last election, is that there is shifting. Like you said, the political spectrum isn't so much left and right anymore, as much as it's these mini factions springing up within the parties. And we see now that whereas I would say even 10 years ago, socialism was a dirty word.
Oh, absolutely.
Through this last election cycle, the Bernie Sanders effect has been that socialism doesn't have that impact, that fear associated with it as it once did. The NRA, when it started losing people and all these people were attacking the NRA and calling them out for giving money to Rubio, LaPierre gets up at the CPAC, convention in Maryland and says that the Democrats are trying to bring socialism into America. I mean, bro, FDR brought socialism into America. We've had socialism for 60 years. You are a little late to the game. People are waking up and realizing that these fear tactics, they're hot air. They're hot air. They're nothing. It's the fearful strikes of animal in retreat, So I do think we're seeing a culture shift, and I think it's a good thing. And I think it's a very appropriate time for a podcast like this where we talk about, these events and how it impacts our culture, because we are in a time of essentially culture is rewriting itself right now. We have an opportunity. And unfortunately, with Trump as president, it feels like it's an uphill battle. Mm-hmm. But I think the tides are changing. And especially if gerrymandering, which should be a topic for next time, gets addressed, I think that we definitely will see some big changes in the American political spectrum.
Oh, absolutely. And I've seen some commentators say something along the lines of the liberals won the culture war and now they're just beating it over the heads of everyone else. I think we're at the start of the next culture war, and we haven't seen anything yet.
No, we are in a very interesting, and this is something that as a multicultural society we have to realize. This is something we have to deal with, is that there has been a culture war, and it's almost like that culture war of the 70s, the counterculture movement, has been subsumed into the greater American culture. Now there's something new happening. It's almost like those people who are upset that what was once counterculture is now part of mainstream culture, they want to kind of shift everything back to the right. And that's causing a lot of people to dig in their heels. It's like a tug of war. And so I think you're right. We're going to see some big culture war type events happening in the next 10 years. This next decade is going to be a decade that redefines America and what she is and who she'll be moving forward. And as a declining empire, we probably should take that as a serious thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So with that, I believe that is the end of our first episode. Thank you for listening to the Arbitrary and Capricious podcast. We hope to be back with you next week to talk about some more interesting things. I was Aaron.
And I'm Jay.
And we will be with you next time.